Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our 50/50 Women on Board's London Conversation on Board Diversity. I'm Julie Carlisle, partner and UK Centre for Board Matters leader here at EY, and we're absolutely delighted to be chairing the London Conversation. But more importantly, I'm delighted that you have joined us today to discuss how we can lead the way to a diverse and gender balanced board. Now, our Centre for Board Matters programme is focused on supporting non-exec directors and board level executives of today and also of tomorrow. And for us at EY, supporting diversity at board level is our real priority. For example, we recently sponsored the annual Female FTSE Board Report conducted by Cranfield University's School of Management, which was launched last month. We're really excited to be working with 50/50 Women on Boards in their campaign committed to achieving gender balance on corporate boards. And I see firsthand the difference a diverse board can really make. Now, I'm sure we can this year celebrate the progress that has been made towards that balance, but we definitely still have a long way to go. Now, our London Conversation is one of 30 occurring all around the world and all in November, so it's a busy schedule for 50/50 Women on Boards. And just before I run you through our order of play for today, let me ask Betsy, who's the Chief Exec globally of 50/50 Women on Boards, to say a very quick hello. Welcome, Betsy.
Good morning, London. Good morning, Julie. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, where our headquarters of 50/50 Women on Boards is located. And not only is London one of 30 events throughout the globe that we're staging here in November, but also we're reaching 6,000 people who are attending over the course of 3 weeks here in November. Yes, we've been busy, but we're very, very pleased to have London as part of our network and our series of events. And I'd like to also congratulate Denise and the panel you're going to hear for achieving and for tracking the excellent statistics you've achieved in the UK, and mention that in the US we are really ecstatic to report that we've reached the highest level in history of the Russell 3000 companies. Here in the US, we have reached 25% of the board seats being held by women. So the campaign is working. I thank you for your support in London, one of our 5 cities in the international sector. We're also in Athens this year, and Madrid, Mexico City, and Toronto. So let me turn the microphone back to you, Julie, and to our spectacular panel coming up, and look forward to having everybody in London continue with the campaign, because this is a global effort, not just one country and not just one woman. We're all in this to help one another. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, Betsy, and thank you so much, and congratulations on all what you've done to date. So back to the order of play, if we could pop the agenda up. We're covering 3 things today. Firstly, you're going to hear from Denise Wilson, who is the Chief Executive of the FTSE Women Leaders Review, formerly known as the Hampton-Alexander Review, who will give some context about where we are to date from the most recent review. Secondly, Denise will be putting some questions to our VIP panel, and I'm sure you're going to hear some great thoughts, insights, and maybe even some advice from our keynote panelists. And finally, you'll participate in your interactive breakout sessions led by our fantastic breakout leaders. So just some quick housekeeping points from me, and then we can get started. So throughout the event, we would encourage you to use the chat box to engage in the conversation with each other and to connect with each other. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat box with your contact details, and people will come back to you. The real chance to ask questions will be in the breakout sessions later on this evening. And then if you are unfortunate enough to be disconnected, please do email events@5050wob.com that was up earlier. So let me now, great pleasure in handing over to Denise.
Thank you very much, Julie, for that kind introduction, and of course to Betsy for asking us to join the 50/50 global conversation here today. We have a great panel, which I'm really excited to introduce to you and start the conversation. But first, let me just set the scene for where we are in the UK. So the context of UK is a decade ago, we had just 9% of women sitting on FTSE 350 boards, and there are 152 all-male boardrooms in the UK. If you can just imagine that, almost half of the index didn't have a single woman sitting at that table. We had virtually no data, and I think many of us who were working on this in the preceding decades thought that we had made progress, but we didn't have the data to prove that. I think this subject during the whole of my career was a pretty niche conversation, actually, a bit of a career-limiting conversation. And in just a decade, we seem to have turned all of that around. No longer are we hugging the water cooler and talking in hushed tones. This is a key strategic topic for most businesses today, how they use all of their talent and how they recruit, retain and promote diverse workforce, specifically women. Next slide, please. So just a few stats, and clearly the stats aren't everything. Progress comes in many forms, and as we go into the conversation, I think you'll see that this is a pretty complex conversation these days and very nuanced. And the stats, it's important to keep the stats, it's important to have the data, but there are many, many other signs of great progress, changes in the workplace and how we work, and clearly much more to do. So FTSE 100 leadership, by women in leadership in the UK, we mean those sitting just below the board. So typically the most senior 50 to 100 jobs in a typical FTSE 350 company. And that's the red bars that you can see here, and we're tracking every single woman, man in and out of those roles and reporting on them each year. And currently FTSE 100, as you can see, at 30.6%, and the two indexes together just below that. The grey is women on boards. Incidentally, we have a UK and a US audience here, and so just to make sure we get the terminology right, in the UK we talk about executive directors and non-executive directors. Executive directors meaning those that would be in the red bar largely, albeit they may sit on the board. And non-executive directors are those who sit on the board, and who in the US you would call that, I believe, independent directors, as opposed to, sorry, non-independent directors are the independent directors, with non-independent directors being in the red bars, if that was clear. If not, we'll touch on it in a moment as we open up the discussion. Thank you. Next slide, please. So where have we got to? I mean, you'll be able to access all of these slides later, so I won't talk through them. I'm keen to get onto the panel, but as you can see, areas of success. Clearly the numbers, it's been a voluntary regime, no quotas, no fines, no penalties, no threats of delisting for those that chose not to appoint women, but everybody seems to have got there. And, we have insights into the complex and compounding barriers that face not just women, but anybody who presents differently to a senior white man getting to the top of British business. We have insights that a decade ago we could barely have put a label on, never mind discussed and understood. And the whole of this is creating a much more modern, much more appropriate business culture than the one that we've seen in the past. Next slide, please. But we clearly have a long way to go, and these would be our top 10 on the list of much more work to do. Despite all the efforts that many, many companies and leaders have made, we are still seeing around 60% of all available roles going to men, so a low appointment rate. We have the odd one and done board yet. Luckily, no boards, but there are still boards who have a tokenistic approach to this. They've got one woman, and they're sitting there quite content in that space. So that's clearly not diversity. And I think we'd have what I might just put perhaps most of the bottom boxes in the sort of knowing doing gap. Lots of organisations and their leaders knowing this is the right thing to do, that they need to get on top of this for their own economy, for the good of their company. and also it's the right thing to do, but not yet acting or not yet acting sufficiently. Okay, so I think that's that's sort of where we have to go, and obviously we're focusing on women today, and we know that we still have a very long way to go to increase women's representation at the top. But clearly we have a very long way to go as well to increasing Black and ethnic minority board members, who still lag around just 10% of all of our board members, and we have much more work to do there. Again, let's discuss that as we go into the conversation. Thank you. And so I'd like to introduce to you our panel, and we have it's called a VIP panel. It certainly is a VIP panel. It is it's a truly UK and US panel. And first up, let me introduce Anne Gates, who is on the board of Richmond, James and Kroger, and also chair of Tapestry, 3 boards in the US. We have Melody Mayer, who is on the board of BP in the UK and AbbVie in the US, amongst other boards, who joins us today from Texas. We have Anne Cairns, who is Executive Vice Chair at MasterCard. She chairs the board also of Intercontinental Exchange and is probably well known to many of you as Global Chair of the 30% Club. And finally, David Tyler, who chairs the boards of the White Company, Domestic and General, and Imager Holdings. So thank you. So let me turn, as the panel are just taking their seats, let me turn to some of the questions. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to go to Melody first, actually. Melody, we hear that boards seek value-added expertise, that's what they're looking for in bringing along diverse candidates. What benefits have you seen in your various board roles of diverse boards over the more homogeneous boards? How do they differ, and what's the value?
So thank you, Denise, for the opportunity to join this really distinguished panel this afternoon. I have the opportunity to serve on 3 boards with good diversity in each of the 3, varying diversity, but good diversity. And I guess let's talk about value add and skill sets a little bit. When I first interviewed for boards, my first question is to them, why do you want me? And the first CEO I talked to said, well, we don't have any women on the board. And that was code for me to turn around and leave, because boards need to be looking for specific skill sets that people are bringing to the table. And, more P&L, profit and loss, and line management is a really important skill set. But more and more, the evolution of different skill sets are coming to the boardroom. Technology, digitization, cybersecurity, ESG focus, sustainability, and climate. But when we know corporations outperform that have high diversity in the boardroom, the question is, why aren't boardrooms more diverse? What I will tell you, that in all of the boards that I sit in, the women in the room are very vocal. They bring up ideas. They bring up different ideas. They're very well prepared, and they really do bring a lot of value to the conversation. So I would say that diversity of skill sets is really important. Just because we're women doesn't mean we're diverse, because we all bring a different skill set to the table, and that skill set is evolving. But the women that I serve on boards with are not shy about speaking up, and really bring that perspective to the table.
Thank you. And Anne, I don't know if you'd like to add that the skill sets and the attributes of a modern board member, they've evolved a lot recently, haven't they? Certainly in the last decade. Is that helpful to organisations seeking to diversify their boards, and of course women who are seeking to have strong board careers after their corporate career?
I think very much so, Denise, because I think if I can say, in the olden days, when people were assembling boards, they were basically looking out there to just recruit CEOs. And so actually what they were doing was recruiting people that were basically senior general managers. rather than people who had real expertise, deep expertise in things like technology or, say, bioscience, if you were on a pharmaceutical board. Whereas I think in the new world, that is what people are looking at now in respect of their board candidates. And so, you can even find professors on some boards. I know there was a professor on my AstraZeneca board, actually from Manchester University, a woman. And so I think that this changes the game and makes the company stronger. I think the other thing about diverse boards is we're not in a world now of shareholder management. We're in a world of stakeholder management, where companies are really looking at the markets they serve, what they're doing for the people in their company, and what they're doing for wider society. And it's part of a company's strategy to think extremely broadly now. So having a very broad bench of board members, because after all, that's what board members do. They look at your strategy and they discuss it and they help you guide your thinking. That's what you really need for the future.
Great, great. And I guess good news for women too. David, you've, through your board career, no doubt seen quite a bit of change in the typical board member, but as a chair, which you are now of several boards, how hard is it, how different is it to have to manage that diverse board and make sure that, everybody's voice is heard and heard properly?
Well, it's a crucial part of what one does as a chair. And as Anne said, you start off by thinking about the balance of the board and how you can create value for your business, your company, in the best possible way, right across the suite of things that are there. Of course, it's long-term profit maximization, it's sustainability, it's a whole range of things. So you're thinking all the time about who you would want on the board in order to meet that. And goodness, you aren't half right, Anne. It's so different from what it was 30 years ago, when most chairs today are really thinking of that balance, because they know all the sorts of issues they have to tackle. And so I think it's really important when you have that group of people, that melange of people, people obviously of both genders, of different ages, of different nationalities, of different colours and so on, to think about creating the right inclusive atmosphere and lead them with that very much in mind. You want a supportive group, of course, you want a constructive group, but also one that's challenging. And actually, you're not going to get the groupthink that sometimes you always had in the old boards when you have the sort of group that we talk about today. And very often one has to, bring out the talents of individuals around the board table who are a little bit quieter. I'm not talking about necessarily women. There are also men who can be quiet, and there are sometimes people you need to calm down and divert a little bit from what they're trying to do. So it's active management by the chair with this group of people around it of different talents and capabilities and expertises that makes, for me, the best possible board today.
Calm down a few people. I like that term. I remember that one.
It happens quite a lot, let me say, when passions get raised, and of course they do in the best boards.
Melody.
Just to add a couple things that I've observed as best practices, when a chairman in executive session at the end of a board meeting asks every individual in the room for a perspective, I think is a really good practice. And another good practice is at a dinner meeting after a board call is to also have the chairman go around the room and ask everyone to reflect on the day's meeting. Those kinds of events are some of the best insights that I get in the boardroom. So just a couple of best practices.
Create lots of informal atmospheres, and you get very good diverse feedback in that, where some people aren't so good sitting around a table. They're really good with a gin and tonic on their hand, telling you what they really think. Always make those possibilities happen.
Thank you, Anne. Anne Gates, if I may turn to you. We hear a lot about networks and the value of networks. How can we help make sure that women, particularly women, become better network? Because we know men do this very well and do it very naturally. But how do we make sure that women are more visible throughout their careers so that, when positions come up, they're not just visible, they're the obvious choice for either board or leadership roles?
Yeah, what I'll say on that, I mean, these networks are absolutely invaluable and very necessary in terms of people being able to develop their careers, so to speak, in terms of boards. And that piece of developing the network falls partly on us, and of course falls on the person themselves. And the one thing that I do think is very beneficial is to make sure that people have the opportunity to understand and understand how to develop their networks. So almost an education on some aspects of it, because I've been disappointed, to be honest with you, in terms of some of the networking that's done. It's almost a one and done. They meet someone, they say, I'm great, the person is impressed, and you meet a lot of people in your career. 5 months later, you're not going to remember that person. And so the key is, how do you develop that network such that that person that you've met, that you've impressed, a year and a half later will think of you? And I really think that coaching people in terms of developing those relationships is absolutely key. Having them send out reminders in terms of, I got this promotion, following up immediately after that first meeting. I think those types of things are very important. I think giving people external exposure is key, especially with the big brand name companies like Disney, which I worked with for years. Not-for-profits, huge not-for-profits are calling up saying, who can be on the board that's a Disney executive? Giving your executives time to work on some of these very influential boards is key networking for them, as well as an opportunity for them to develop their own relationships. I think educational opportunities are also very key. These Harvard programs, the Stanford programs, those networks that you can develop in the programs, plus the fact that you've moved them out of their day-to-day work environment such that they can think about these bigger issues in terms of developing their networks, thinking strategically, and all of that is important. And another one I'll throw in there, because of course there's a ton of different things that can be done, is international assignments, and really encouraging women to take on international assignments, especially with the world being as global as it is today. To not have that experience of living in another country, dealing with different cultures, all of that sort of stuff, that's a huge miss for executives, especially in this world that we're developing. And I just think that a lot of times what happens is, if a job opens up in, Thailand, for example, a lot of times what happens is, oh, she's a woman, she has kids, the kids aren't going to want to move. There's a lot of assumptions that come into play. When I was living in LA and that London job came up and my daughter was in high school, she was actually the first one to raise her hand and say, I want to move to London. So I think these assumptions that get made about women really hurt them. And so if we can help them to get to the forefront of the road to get some of these really big assignments and not make these assumptions, I think is pretty key.
Yeah. No, assumptions can be very disabling, gender stereotyping. David, I don't know if you had anything to add on the networking. I know I always say men do it extremely well, and it's something that women can learn from them, actually. Should watch and take note. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think men should be doing is making sure that they're opening up those networks to women more. That sometimes they're just too male dominated in my experience, and goodness, it makes it so much better to have women as part of that. But yeah, I think there's a genuine benefit from that. You get on the long list more often because of the long list of the headhunters, because people have come across you. And sometimes it makes a big difference in my experience, because when you're looking at a long list and deciding who you're going to interview, who's going to be on the short list you're going to interview, sometimes people will say, well, I know that person. I know that woman. I met her here or there. And, it's not really fair, but it does make a difference. I've seen it in my experience. And what, of course, you want to do is get on that position. And then final thing I say about networking is sometimes a really good way is just be a speaker at conferences. It really enhances your credibility in whatever functional expertise you've got, to be seen as somebody who other people listen to. That really can have quite an impact.
Yeah, great point. Anne Cairns, if I can come to you, I don't know if you remember your first board, I'm sure you do. But what was your own personal experience of getting on that board? What other than networking, assuming networking helped, what other factors were key to you getting on that board?
Absolutely. I can remember my first board, Denise, and it was actually Newcastle Building Society, which is a mortgage bank in the UK. And I'm actually from Newcastle. You can maybe hear that from my accent if you're English.
I am too. You probably can't hear that from my accent. Sorry, carry on.
And rather, as David had said, it was a bit of gin and tonic networking that I think I was indulging in when I actually came across the chairman of Newcastle Building Society, who was a lawyer and a very good chairman. And he got chatting to me at a cocktail party in London. And it turned out that at that time, the Building Society, and this goes to Melody's point, actually, it owned a payments company. It was an unusual thing for a mortgage bank to own. And of course, we chatted and I explained that I worked for MasterCard and had a very deep payments expertise. And he thought, ooh, isn't that interesting? Because wouldn't it be great to have someone on the board who really understood how this acquisition that we've done of a payments company should actually work? Actually it was pre-MasterCard, but I had a payments background anyway, because I would have been in conflict then, but it was pre-MasterCard. And that's how I got recruited to that board, networking in a social setting with the chairman who needed someone with expertise. And there I was with my first board seat. And I loved it because I came straight through the door and was able to add value. We subsequently sold that acquisition. It was the right thing for us to do, and a healthy thing for the organization to do. And it was a really great board experience.
Great. And I like the emerging theme of gin and tonic. It's
yes, I'm with David on that one.
But Melody, if I might just turn to you on that question, there's a lot clearly that diverse candidates can do to help themselves. But what about the structural changes that need to go on in organisations to make sure that they're receptive of people that are different, and they actually get appointed? They don't just get to the long list or to the short list, but they actually get through the door and on the table, to the job at the table.
Well, at the end of the day, it's all about what do you bring to the table and what the value add. I mean, I wouldn't join a board that I didn't feel like I could add value at that board level. And so boards are looking for that, but we all should be looking for that as well. And I think the story of getting on boards is really important for this audience because we all have a different perspective to share. A couple things I'll share with respect to mine is one, being one of the top women in oil and gas and line management, I got reached out by Executive Search, reached out to me throughout my career, and I never talked to them because I felt like it was disloyal. But as I retired, that relationship with Executive Search is really important, and you should develop that relationship before you retire as you are in your career. When I first wrote my first resume for a board, the search firm looked and said, that looks like it's been written by an engineer. And I said, yeah, guilty. I had not written one for 37 years, except for CVs, right? And so I got a coach to help me with a very good board-ready resume, which I think is very important. And then I began the process of the search. And my experiences were very much through Executive Search and networking and relationships, but predominantly Executive Search. And I would also just share another quick perspective is I got a female board member advisor to serve as a personal advisor to me. And that was an invaluable approach for me to help me navigate through the decision process to join the first board. And she told me that, you know, when you're thinking about a board to join, one, be patient, join a board that's commensurate with your experience set, particularly your first one. She said there should be 5 things that you think are important for that board, and that board should hit 5 of 5. If there's 4 things that are interesting, but 5 doesn't feel right, or 3 and 2, don't do it. Wait for 5 out of 5, because this is a really important fiduciary responsibility for a long time, and it has to be the right fit for you personally, but also for the company. And so those were really good advice to me, and it helped me navigate through the kind of board seats that I wanted to join and why. And I think that's just really, really important for getting on your first board. I joined, my first board was outside of my industry. It was pharmaceutical, and I'm oil and gas. And then my second 2 boards were energy related. So it was really helpful to navigate.
And you must tell us, Melody, you sit on boards in the UK and you sit on boards in the US. What's the difference? Is there a difference? Is there a difference how they work, how they recruit and train diverse talent?
Big difference, I would say, but not so much in how I was recruited to the board. I, came to all of my board seats through executive search firms that were looking for, broad range of skill sets and diversity. But very different, as Anne Cairns said, that, the UK boards are very focused on expectations of company purpose. Stakeholder expectations are very high, in addition to shareholder expectations. In the UK or in the US, our shareholders for US companies tend to be more US centric and more shareholder focused boards. But I would also say that a big difference in the UK is often you have a separate chairman from the CEO, whereas in many US companies have a combined chairman CEO role. That's not, every company, but many. And that is a very different construct of a board meeting, is to have a separate chairman from your CEO. And I would also say US governance is a little bit different. We have a lot of expectations from the government around gender pay parity reporting, modern slavery reporting, CEO salary comparisons to the rest of the company, how employees have a voice in the boardroom. So the UK has some governance expectations that are very different than the UK or the US. And so I see that in my various board seats.
And I'm sure you're not going to be as indiscreet as to say which you prefer.
I like them all.
Well, I always think it's on that point, it's so interesting that it's very different from politics. In the United States, Americans are really concerned about having the separation of powers between president and Congress, and the law courts and so on. Here in the UK, it's the reverse. Effectively, the Prime Minister, once elected and has a majority in the House of Commons, has dominance, real dominance. He can make everything happen. It's the other way around in our boardrooms. We actually want to have that separation of power. And having worked in the boardroom, both an executive and as a director, an NED and as a chair over many, many years, I see the benefit of that. Time and again, it means that you can avoid the bad decision. So I think it's very significant.
I'm totally with you on that, David. And I've been in both structures as well. And I think it's marvelous to have that separation of power at the top of the company, because, as I say, if you're looking at company strategy and you're trying to decide some huge decisions, you can be making decisions over whether you're going to merge with another company, or, you're going to fight a hostile takeover, or all sorts of things. Actually, the independence of the chair in that case versus the CEO that's really bought into the company and will have a very non-independent view about how to proceed, really creates strength, I think, in those situations.
Thank you, David. I might just stick with you actually in your role as on the Parker Review, which is the UK initiative for more black and ethnic minority board members in the UK on FTSE companies. That we've made great progress, I guess, on women. We know we've still got a very long way to go. We've got more to do in CEO roles. We've got more to do in chair roles, but we've got much more to do in terms of black and ethnic minority women of colour, even more lacking. And when we look at the latest Parker Review stats, I think around 80 of the FTSE 100 after several years of the initiative have a person of colour on their board, but still we have a long way to go. FTSE 250 even worse, and I think overall in terms of Black and ethnic minority group members on FTSE 350 boards, it's somewhere around 10% or even less. I mean, why has progress been so slow there, and how do you recommend companies go about fixing that so that we can build truly diverse boards?
Yeah, well, firstly, you're right. The ethnic representation on boards is lower in the UK than the female representation on boards. But after all, 50% of the population are women. Only 14%, roughly, of the UK population comes from ethnic minorities. So you wouldn't expect them to be quite the same. However, of course, Denise, you're right. Progress has not yet reached where the level one would hope it would be. Essentially, the Parker Review started in 2016, around 6 or 7 years later than the key start of some of the things on women. And our key report was in 2017, where we set a target, which is just about to come. So it's a good moment for you to ask that question. Just the end of this year, December 2021, we said that every board in the FTSE 100 should expect to have at least one person from an ethnic minority. And our last report, which was effectively the end of last year, the beginning of this, was 81 out of 100 had at least one ethnic diverse member. And I very much hope we'll be in the 90s by the time we get to the end of this year, a couple of months or whatever. But we have to go an awful lot further than we have got. We should be, over a period of time, getting to the rough balance with ethnic minorities in the population. That doesn't mean it has to be precise, but one worries if it's not going to get to that over a period of time. And therefore, it's important for chairs to set the right tone from the top on, of course, diversity in general, but ethnicity as part of that. They've got to be out there championing it, rewarding success where it's there, setting people targets, if you like, just as they should with women. They should jump on bad behaviours. I always talk a lot about micro incivilities, what's going on when someone is disrespecting another person. It could be a black person, it could be a woman or whatever. And then there's lots of other things that one can do internally. But unless the chair, the chief executive and the board are putting their shoulder to the wheel, it won't happen. And they won't get the benefits, which is the real point. It's not just about equity, it's about the benefits of having that diversity of experience sitting around that table. And finally, just to talk about one individual person that I put on a board a few years ago, because you're saying, how does someone get their first board or first NED position? This was a woman called Jean Tomlin, a black woman who just did a standout job in the London Olympics back in 2012, where she led the games makers that so many people in London will remember. She did a standout job there. She had a great career. And just as with women, the same for people of minority ethnics, the number one way to get onto a board is just have a standout executive career. And hopefully you're going to become an executive director, even a chief executive, why not? But it'll also help you get on boards thereafter. Have a great career, do a standout job, and have people like you. You'll have a great opportunity at board level.
Anne Gates, I just wondered if you had a perspective.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to this. First is, the one and done type of situation that happens with a lot of these different appointments. And I do agree so much with David's point in terms of you do have to have a chair and a board who really does care about this, because what happens if they don't is that the minority ends up being the person that agitates to be for, more diversity in the workforce, et cetera, and constantly it's the one that brings up these issues, and therefore almost falls into the stereotypical view of they're just going to create, bad dynamics on the board, all of that sort of stuff. So I do think this one and done is an issue, and it really has to be championed by the chair and the other directors and should not be left to the one minority that's sitting in the room. So I think that's a key piece that the chair needs to do. Again, I'll go back to, on the second point, networking. I think the one problem with the networking is we network with those that we know. And a lot of times those that we know are very homogeneous. And so what we really need to figure out how to do is, how do you network outside of your comfort zone? How do you network in groups that maybe don't look like you, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that's where people need to be innovative and, call the 10 or 20 Black CEOs that exist, at least in the United States, because what does happen is there is a network that does form around those people. And therefore, if you call a Ken Chenault, who was the CEO of American Express, most likely he will have people that he knows because he's running in multiple different networks. And I think that's a really key point that chairs and boards need to do. Get outside of your comfort zone as you're doing that type of networking.
I think that's really great advice. Thank you. Can I just stick with you for a moment, Anne? I've always thought that investors were a little slow to the pace on this subject, in the UK certainly. And I remember saying years ago, a decade ago, if they were to get behind this, we could sort it very quickly. And I do think in the last year or two in the UK, for sure, and you've probably seen that in the US too, they have got much better and much more seriously behind it. Not all of them. I just wanted your views on that, really. Could they do more? Are they doing enough even now?
I think this move of investors has been absolutely key. And I think the most important part of it is that they're asking for the statistics, because that which gets measured actually gets managed. And so just the fact that they're saying, okay, how many do you have in the room? How many executives do you have, et cetera, that is really making people go, oh, wait, I have zero. I have zero at the level below. I really need to start working because I don't need Larry Fink, his team all over my case. So I do think the fact that they're highlighting, because I've always thought this for a long time, do people really understand the lack of diversity that is at the top? And now I think what's happening is people are understanding it, deciding that it is not appropriate because it doesn't help business performance, and they are actually managing forward in terms of getting that diversity.
Okay, thank you. And Ken, I feel a little over formal mentioning both of your surnames every time. You get the right one. It's I don't think we could have this discussion sort of 2 years on in the pandemic almost and not mention that. But and particularly, but maybe for others too, I'd be interested in your views. We're seeing some really strong stats coming out around attrition in the workforce, particularly of women, around the double burden of women, of how maybe in the sort of get back to work, there's this two-tier sector forming of those that may want to stay and do more flexible working and those not. And, I think it's a little bit swings and roundabouts. I wanted your thoughts on what have the benefits been, maybe for women particularly, through this, and what can we take and should organisations be taking out, and what are the watchwords, what are the risks from your own perspective, really, and what should organisations be doing? Absolutely.
Well, there is a lot of negative stats out there, Denise, as you started with, sort of saying that, about a quarter of the US women, corporate women, are talking about leaving their jobs post-pandemic because they found it so stressful to manage their families, manage their parents, continue working, and so on. But there are counter statistics to this. I mean, in the UK, the BBC did a study, and over 50% of women interviewed said that they found remote working, they felt, was helping their career. because they were actually able to do some of the balancing that's been so hard in their lives until this point in time. And I know that when we switched to remote working, many of the women were talking to me saying, well, this is great. You know, I can pop out and drop the kids off at school. Although why that should be women doing that in the first place is a big question in my mind, in the sense of, you know, we shouldn't perpetuate the unlevel playing field on that. We should be building a society where parents share responsibilities. And now that we're able to work in a remote and a hybrid way, why wouldn't we be doing that? Why wouldn't we be questioning our old norms and saying, what should the new norms be? And I think you're alluding to that when you're talking about, as people are returning now to the offices in some countries, although they're going back in others. I was just in Holland yesterday and they're going back into a lockdown. So it's difficult. You know, we're opening up and closing down in different parts of the world. But as this is happening, we should be thinking about the future and saying, what do we want that future to be? And I think that the whole contract between business, government, and society needs to be rewritten. There's a wonderful book by Manoush Shafiq on this from London School of Economics. And it's talking about how things like childcare and so on are predicated on, say, the Industrial Revolution. We're not living in that time anymore where, you know, where our men are going out to work and we're, you know, waiting for them to come home and putting the dinner on the table for them and so on. We're in a completely new world. And so we need to address the underlying things such as, you know, equal maternity, paternity leave everywhere in the world, which my company does, but also, you know, what are governments doing? Have they got a childcare infrastructure that supports women actually taking their place economically in the workforce, and therefore creating something that could get us naturally to a 50-50 women on board situation? So I think there's a lot to be done in this space. It's a very exciting topic, and we should have another discussion about it.
Just on that. Melody, I don't know, we're about out of time, but I don't know, you look like you might have something you're very keen to add to that. If you've got something for 30 seconds.
Real quick, I have a daughter, young professional with toddlers, and her husband works, and they share everything equally. And I told her the story, Anne, that you just shared is, you know, you should share that. And they said, Mom, when the kids are up, they interrupt Mom. They don't interrupt Dad. We're both working, but they always come to Mom and interrupt. So it is a challenge. But I would say the practice is for companies to provide backup childcare. Many of us in our careers, we don't need the time off with children, but we need backup childcare and things like that allow women to stay focused and committed to their jobs, make a difference, and to adjust around those schedules, really important. So that I think that's a great practice for companies.
Thank you. Backup childcare, I like that. I think on that one. Okay, look, I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you all. I'd like to just wrap up with one very quick question to all of you. And I will just go round in turn, and it's literally a snappy 30 seconds if you've got it, because we're about timed out. And it is, what is the best advice that you were given throughout your career? And what is the best advice that you would give? So I'm going to start first with David.
Oh, the short straw, Denise, huh? Thank you very much. Well, I can tell you, I think the best advice was the simplest advice. You know, David, be yourself. Don't ever try and be anything that you're not. And that certainly, you know, worked well for me. And so if I'm giving advice to others, I'd say the same to them. You know, be yourself, do a great job, make sure that people like you because of who you are. That'll make a big difference. And also don't 100% focus on your working life. Have an outside life too. My goodness, it doesn't make half a difference in my experience to people if they've got an outside perspective, as well as a fantastic experience of the pharmaceutical industry or whatever. So those are my short words, Denise.
Excellent. Melody, next.
Yeah, I think the best advice I was given is the one I mentioned about things, 5 out of 5 have to work before you join a board. The best advice that I would give to this audience is really to stay in line management as much as possible. Stay really close to your core function. do a standout job, as David said, in your, whatever you do incredibly well, be recognized, but add value so that you can add value to the board seat that you get after you add value to your industry and your company.
Thank you. Anne Gates.
I guess mine is somewhat obvious as well, but I thought it was really good advice. It was the chairman of our group who said, I think you basically have the skills to take my job. However, you need to convince your peers that you have the skills to take my job. And I just thought that was great advice. And to David's point, it takes the blinders off of heading straight up that hill, but really bringing everybody with you in terms of reaching that. I thought that was great advice, and advice I'd give to everybody just because I just believe in the global world that we live in, that international experience, if you can get it, if you can make that move, you'll get rewards like that will be hard to deliver anywhere else in your career. So those are my two pieces.
Thank you. And Anne, best advice you were given?
Well, mine was, I was very decisive when I was younger, and my boss told me, you've got to slow down to speed up. So don't make a decision, then make another decision, and then make another decision. He said, think like a chess player. Think 5 steps ahead, and it will influence the decisions that you make, but you'll start making them better and faster because you've actually thought so far ahead. I thought that was great advice. My advice is, if your boss doesn't rate you, find a new boss. Because basically, whatever happens to you in your career, they're the ones who usually decide, not the people who work for you, and not even your peers. Your boss usually decides your next step, or how it's going to go.
Excellent, and a fantastic place to end. Can I just, I'd suggest any of our listeners hear all of those again. Actually, I'd love to summarize, but we're out of time. A great conversation, some great advice from our VIP for sure panel. Thank you all very much. And back to Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let me just echo, what amazing advice, what amazing wisdom, what amazing insights. Thank you all so much for that. I think the one that I've taken away that I've heard a huge amount of is be persistent in your networking. So again, thank you for everybody for sharing. Before we transition to the breakout sessions, as well as thanking the panel, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Denise for moderating the panel, but also to thank Betsy and her team at 50/50 Women on Boards for all the amazing work they're doing, not just here supporting us in the London conversation, but all the way around the world. And also let me thank in advance our fantastic breakout leads who you really are just about to meet. Betsy has said to me, as we're talking about strategic networking, pleased to highlight that actually Women 50/50 on Boards does some great training sessions on strategic networking. And if you look on the website, you'll be able to link yourself into some of those. Now, on to the practicalities. So if you let me quickly just tell you how to access your breakout sessions for the final part of this event. If you look over to the left side of your screen and click Agenda, on your agenda, you will hopefully see your breakout room. And if you click into that session and click Join Now, you should hopefully join your breakout leader and the other members who are there. That should give you your access. And if you have any problems accessing it, again, please just email events@5050wob.com, and the email is located in the description of the session. So all it leaves me to say is thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation and you found it insightful and inspiring. I certainly did. I hope you enjoy the breakout sessions, and thank you once more.